Hey everybody, welcome to ABA Inside Track. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute, this isn't our normal full topic. Well, this is one of our fun bonus episodes. If you've been following the news recently, or if you frequent our Facebook page, then you may have seen a series NPR did recently on abuse of individuals with developmental disabilities. It's certainly not a topic that any of us ever want to hear happens, but unfortunately, many individuals with disabilities are among the most abused in our country. Simply because I don't think we as a country really have ever, until the recent past, thought about individuals with disabilities as being sexual in any way, either in the positive statement of individuals with disabilities can have sexual relationships, healthy sexual relationships, or unfortunately in the idea that they can be victims of abuse if we as a whole don't teach individuals how to know that they may be victims of abuse or that someone is an abuser, or how to advocate for themselves about what is and is not comfortable. When I was reading these pieces, I came upon one of the articles on teaching, because much of our show is about teaching. And there were a lot of references to Katherine McLaughlin, who works up in New Hampshire as a trainer and developer of a sexuality education curriculum for individuals with developmental disabilities. Now, Katherine was kind enough to find some time where she could talk to us at ABA Inside Track a little bit about her background, the process of developing her sexuality curriculum, and then just some general thoughts on the state of sexuality training in America. And so, without any further ado, here is our interview with Katherine McLaughlin.
Hello, this is Katherine.
Hi, Katherine. This is Rob Perry Cruz from the ABA Inside Track.
Hi.
How you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good, thanks. So, Katherine, could you tell me, just start with an easy question, tell me about yourself and how you got into working in special education.
Yeah, so I spent many years working for Planned Parenthood of Northern New England. Right out of college, I started working there as a sexuality educator and trainer. And I was doing general sexuality education in the schools, working with parents, training professionals, and started to get some requests from people in the special ed departments in the schools, as well as developmental disability agencies, looking for some support around this. So I started offering trainings, and I also personally have a physical disability. And so the topic overall was an interest to me too. So sort of personally seeing how people are treated with disabilities around this topic, but then my work as well sort of led me to this path.
Okay. And now you said you were already sort of interested, or you had a job where you were teaching sexuality. How does one,
Yep.
I always want to ask, how does one kind of come to that as their career? Because sexuality, I think, is one of those areas that it's ubiquitous, for all adults. But at the same time, I would never consider myself a sexuality expert. I wouldn't even think to say that about myself, even though I probably know some of the same information that you would start with.
Right. I mean, I think part of it is I started working for an organization that I really loved and believed in their mission, and also love the environment, the work environment at Planned Parenthood. So I always wanted that kind of a, environment, work environment, and to be mission driven. So it really started more around what I was looking for a career was more about the environment and the mission. And then, I started working actually in the health center. So I was greeting patients and doing pregnancy options counseling early on. And then this position of a community educator came up, and I have always enjoyed education. I feel like it's part of my roots. My mom was a elementary school teacher, my dad a college professor. So I always liked education, and there I was at an organization that was looking for someone to do education around all their topics. And so that's really kind of how it all happened.
All right. So what was the process of developing your current curriculum? Because you were working in Planned Parenthood, you were teaching about sexuality, and then you had sort of this interest in teaching sexuality to individuals with developmental disabilities and a need.
How did that all go?
Yeah, how'd that all
Yeah,
go?
go ahead. Yeah. So, I mean, I think I started doing trainings and I started to see the need. But what I think also happened was when I first started doing this work, people were saying, will you come in and teach the class? Will you come in and teach the class? And over the last 20, 25 years, people are starting to say, okay, I'll do it, but can you help me?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's been more of a shift where I'm sort of supporting other people teaching the topic. And so the curriculum was designed so that people could feel like they could do it and gain confidence. It is designed for people with disabilities and a staff person to team teach the topic.
Okay.
So it's really well scripted, and we scripted it for self-advocates or people with disabilities. But I find that everybody likes the script because we're in a culture that doesn't really talk about this, and so people want to know, like, how do you say it in a normal, healthy way?
No, you don't do birds and bees and all that stuff.
No, right, exactly. The stork. No, we leave that out. So that it's well scripted. There's handouts, teaching tools, so people don't have to create their own class, and so it makes it really easy for people that either aren't teachers already, because lots of special educators could create their own kind of lessons, or not sexuality educators and need some of that, just a little kind of boost. So a lot of my work now is training other people to use the curriculum. And the interesting thing with the curriculum was that it was designed to be team taught, but also the focus is sexual self-advocacy. And a lot of the self-advocates that I worked with and spoke with said that it's much easier to be a self-advocate than a sexual self-advocate, and that there were a lot of sort of myths and beliefs about people with disabilities that made it, when they brought up, I want to be in a relationship, or I want privacy, or I want to go out on a date, or whatever it might be, there was less of a positive reaction than if they said they wanted to get a job or go to school. Or so the idea with sexual self-advocacy is to help people even advocate for people thinking of them as a sexual person and thinking of them as, oh, you do want a relationship. So it's about asking for what you need as far as relationships go, and also within relationships as well. How do you advocate for what you want or don't want? Or it's sort of threaded throughout the whole curriculum, this focus on sexual self-advocacy.
So even in kind of our modern times, where the issues of sexuality are a lot more talked about, a lot more fluid, and the idea of individuals with disabilities as being sexual beings, just like individuals without disabilities, do you still find that you kind of go to any of your trainings or you're doing teaching that people are still kind of scared to broach the subject, like it's still kind of a taboo?
Yeah, I think it's taboo. I think also people just don't have the skills. Like I said, they didn't have maybe role models that talked about it. And so we often rely on our values, and that's not effective sexuality education, to try to sort of impose our values or as a technique. So I think people just are kind of lost in a lot of ways. I think also people feel this incredible need to protect people with disabilities. So, if I give them this information, am I somehow putting them at risk? Is it going to do something? Am I responsible? So I think there's lots of reasons, including taboo. And so people knowing, having the skills really increases their confidence. People are more willing to address the topic.
Sure. So do you have like a prepared statement that you have for those either families or groups that are kind of giving you that look like, I don't know, this doesn't seem right for the individuals that we're working with, or my family member who I'm kind of scared about sexuality and broaching the subject?
Yeah. So what was your question? Like, what do I do when I'm faced with people sort of resisting or worried or that? Yeah. I think there's a lot of myths out there. Like, if you talk about it, then people will do it. And that's not true. And also the myth that sexuality education, you're going to teach somebody how to have sex, and it's much broader than sexual expression. It's about public and private and relationships and communication and how do you break up with somebody, and it's lots and lots of skills, as well as what are the different types of sexual expression, what's okay with you or not okay with you. But that's a small piece of the whole curriculum. So I think people just kind of worry like that you're teaching them to have sex, and that's not what we're doing.
No, and certainly I came to your website through the NPR series on sexual abuse for individuals with disabilities, and the idea that the curriculum that was being used in one of the schools they looked at wasn't just about you should have sex and here's how. It really did have a lot of other pieces.
Right. And I think that helps with some of the resistance. Like the reason, sexuality education is, knowledge is power, right? And if someone knows about sexual abuse and how to prevent it or how to speak up if it happens, that's going to make an impact in the statistics, and there's going to be less of that and less unplanned pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections and all of that. So I think that sometimes people are worried, but they can understand that it will actually help people, not harm them.
When you are teaching, different groups, I assume you're teaching lots of groups who say, could you please come help us? We want to learn about teaching sexuality for this type of disability or that type of disability group. Do you find that there's a lot of individualization that needs to go into the process?
Yeah. So I think, some of it, you can pick up the curriculum and you can just teach the group and they are able to do all the activities without any problem. And then there's sometimes when you have to adapt them, maybe a different way, people have a different way of communicating, or maybe aren't strong readers or writers. And so making some adaptations, individual adaptations, for people with disabilities. I think some people need more one-on-one kinds of education versus the group. People really benefit from the group because you can hear other people's perspectives, but they might need a little more individual attention around some of the topics.
Are there topics that you find, even if maybe some portions of the curriculum, might not be able to be taught to all of your group, that these are the ones that these have to be taught? I want to make sure that these get taught. They're the most important components.
Yeah, I think I think it so depends on the person, because I think some people need and want all of it, and some people might need more of the basics like anatomy and friendship, and maybe less about sexual relationships and more about just being a friend, or being what's public and private and what kinds of relationships there are. So I think everybody needs kind of that, and then some people need more.
So when you're teaching or when you're teaching others to teach, are there sort of styles that you found to be more effective than others in presenting this material?
Yeah, I think one of the pieces of my training is talking about your role as a sexuality educator. And I think part of that is, providing facts and a range of opinions about the topic and not your values, but also really focusing on the age of the people in your class, the biological age, and adapting things to be more concrete as an educator. And the other piece is creating a safe learning environment or space for people to, think about the topic, talk about it, ask questions, be who they are, be comfortable and, not be anxious or worried or scared. And so how do you create an environment with a really sensitive topic where people feel safe? And so I think any of those sorts of techniques that we use, like we use a lot of group agreements. So how are we going to treat each other in this class? And we come up with those on, as a group. and then they become our kind of class rules.
Mm-hmm.
That helps people feel really safe because they know that they're not going to be made fun of or asked to answer a question, called on the spot or whatever will make people feel safer.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that really helps. I also think that being inclusive of different gender and sexual identities is very important in
Mm-hmm.
sexuality education, because lots of people who are, gay, lesbian, bisexual will say that in sexuality education classes they feel invisible
Oh,
because
okay.
everyone's assuming heterosexuality and
Mm-hmm.
saying, the man and the woman, and they're not attracted to the other gender, and so they feel invisible. So I think we have to use a lot of inclusive language
Mm-hmm.
and talk about different sexual identities and also gender and transgender issues as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Mm-hmm.
So inclusive, and I think also being positive about sexuality rather than fearful.
Sure.
Yeah, instead of using scare tactics, but to be positive and be informative and help people make their own choices.
In working with individuals with developmental disabilities, have you found over the years you've been teaching, a similar or somewhat similar sort of trend in the number of participants who identify as gay, lesbian, or even transgender, or is that something you
Yeah,
don't see quite as
yeah.
frequently?
Well, it's interesting. I think there's been some new research out
Mm-hmm.
recently around, in particular, people with autism
Mm-hmm.
having a higher rate of gender dysphoria than the general population. So there's starting to see some trends
Mm-hmm.
around increased numbers. I would say 10 years ago, I would say it was similar to the general population.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, why that is. Is that just we're more aware, people are understanding it more, and
Mm-hmm.
so therefore expressing that desire or orientation, or is something actually really changing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a good question. Do you happen to know where that research was published or?
The article that I have on it, I think it comes from spectrumnews.org is one article.
Oh, I've been to that.
Pretty
That's a very
sure.
good site.
Yeah, so I think it has I think it has the study in this article
Mm-hmm.
here. So that might be a good resource
Spectrum
for
News.
people to look at.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
and then
like to
you
link
can.
on our Facebook page articles from the internet sometimes. So
Oh, great.
I will go to
Yeah.
that site.
Yeah, the other one that I haven't read, but it's from the same site, and I just printed it off because I was curious.
Mm-hmm.
Sex and other foreign words. So I think it's sort of more about sexuality in general.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So those are two probably pretty good articles. There's also an article in, I think it's called Psychology
Mm-hmm.
magazine. I don't know if and it's called Seeking Intimacy, and it's a general article on sexuality and disability, all disabilities.
Oh, okay.
And then there's a couple of a smaller article about intellectual and developmental disabilities
Mm-hmm.
and sexuality. I think it starts on page 48 of the magazine. So that's another good article as
Excellent.
well.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you for those resources. We love them here on
Hmm.
this show.
I bet you do.
Oh, that's our bread and butter is research and articles and all that good stuff. So
Yeah, good.
while on the subject of autism, since the vast majority of our audience are BCBAs, many of whom work with individuals with autism, have you found that teaching there's a amount of either modification or areas you have to be more focused on in teaching individuals with autism? Say, the activities have to be very concrete, or there are certain topics that are vague and difficult to teach?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big question. So I would say that, a lot of my classes that I've taught, I don't necessarily feel like I think, okay, this person has autism
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to do this a little bit different. I mean, I think for all the work I'm doing, I'm very concrete.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a lot of gray areas in sexuality. So I think that's where it can get really difficult for anyone.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really see it more specific to autism.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's definitely stuff around social skills and reading emotions, but I think that's true for someone with an intellectual disability as well. So I think there's a lot of similarities.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think the difference is if you have somebody who has autism and does not have an intellectual disability.
Mm-hmm.
They're like brilliant, right? And they know all kinds of facts and information, but they need more specific to sort of social skills.
Mm-hmm.
Then it might be a little bit different there, but in general, I think it's all pretty much the same.
That's good
content.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's good to know.
Uh-huh.
Or good to get that feedback. Across the years you've been teaching, would you say that there have been additions to your curriculum that you've been especially proud of, or that you feel were a long time in coming and then, just a part of it clicked that maybe hadn't before?
Yeah. Well, I'm considering doing a revision right now because, and I would say the issue that is really coming to the forefront now is gender identity.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the language that I use in the curriculum is really not up to date as far as, we talk about men have penises, women have vaginas. And, as we start looking at gender identity, we're realizing that not all men do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you update language so that it's more inclusive of gender identity? So I think that's
you just blew my mind. I didn't even think that was something that would need to be discussed. Oh my goodness. One more thing I got to remember. Oh.
I know. The other piece is I want to add more about social media and technology, and that over the curriculum is 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's become a bigger part of our lives. So how do we manage those pieces in relationships and sexuality? So those are two topics that I really want to bring in. And then the other possible topic would be something like pornography and what does it teach us? There are places that do this sexuality versus pornography. There's a place in Britain that does a lot of sexuality education to sort of combat all the messages that pornography give around the size of somebody's genitals or, how people have sex and things like that. So how do we sort of teach, because that's such a piece of our culture now, too. There's such access. And a lot of men learn about sex from pornography, whether they have a developmental disability or not. And so how do we learn about the sort of the technology, sexuality? There's also been some articles recently about children who have sent a text of their genitals to somebody and then get, considered labeled as a sex offender. And so how do we teach about, what's okay and not okay? And is that private or is that public?
Do you ever have individuals who are uncomfortable with the idea of like either using real pictures or using real language and who ask you, could you change it to the happy fuzzy language from, the 50s sex ed textbooks? Does that ever come up?
Not really, no. I mean, I think people know that we need to be accurate in how we talk about the topic. So if they're open to it happening, I think they want it to be, accurate and not slang words and, sort of misinformed. So yeah, no, I don't see that at all. I think also around sexual abuse prevention, even young kids, we're teaching them about body parts so they know their body parts. And so I think that also is part of it.
Mm-hmm. So Katherine, I know we're getting close to the end of our time. So one or two more questions. If you had to tell our audience, in your opinion, the most important skill related to either teaching sexuality or being an advocate for sexuality for one's clients, what do you think is the most important thing to be aware of or to know in relation to sexuality?
One thing? I can only say one thing?
No, I mean you can say as many as you like, but in case you just wanted to summarize real quick, as many as you want.
Okay. Well, I just think knowing that everyone is a sexual being, whether they have a disability or not, whether they are 70 years old or, 22 years old, that whether they have the really skinny body or they're overweight, everyone is a sexual being. And we sort of know that, but are there any ways that we kind of don't believe that? And so I would just ask people to think about, in what ways do I deter people from feeling like they're a sexual person? There's sort of examples of a 70-year-old person goes into the doctor and they're having abdominal pain, and they think it's their appendix. They would never think it was pelvic inflammatory disease from a sexually transmitted infection. So, in what ways do we make assumptions about people with disabilities that they're not sexual, or that they're oversexed too, is the other one. I talked to some self-advocates out in Minneapolis. They were in the mainstream health class in high school. So they were learning about nutrition and everything. And then when the sexuality unit came, they were taken out of the class.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So like those messages, right? That, I'm not saying that people that are listening to your podcasts do that, but just that's part of our culture, that people are, take people out of class still. And that isn't, and we're not in the 1950s. And it's still happening for people with disabilities. So I think the more we can give positive messages to them about that they are a sexual being, the better off people will be.
Let's say I'd like to think that most of our audience and most individuals that I work with have a similar positive attitude about sexuality and indeed for sexuality education.
Yep.
Is this something that you feel should be broached if you have parents of either older adolescents or even young adults who are sort of putting their head in the sand? Nope, that's not a thing. That's not a thing. At what point do you push back to families, or do you ever? Is it just it has to come naturally?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I think when I'm working with parents, I try to figure out, I think they really have to trust me, right? And know that I'm not going to push my values, and that actually that's their job, is to teach values. And I do a lot of, making sure they know I'm not going to do that, that's their job, but also, really empathizing with how hard it is to be a parent around sexuality topics, and especially if there's a disability as well. And so I think, really empathizing. I've had parents say to me, anytime they interview somebody to be a personal care attendant for their son or daughter, they wonder if this is the person that's going to abuse their son or daughter. Really real concerns about sexual abuse. And so I think, really building my relationship with them by empathizing and finding out what worries them about being in the sexuality education class or about their child learning this information, so that I can, help them feel supported and understood, but also maybe talk about, well, what would be good about them learning this, and what would be hard about it? What do you worry about? And what do you think would be really positive about it? I think, meeting people where they're at.
Sure.
And maybe gently nudging, right?
The gentle nudge, yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, Katherine, it has been such a treat talking to you about this very important topic. Where would you mind sharing where your main resources are located, or if people would like to look into your work?
Sure. Yeah. So I have I have a website. It is www.disabilityworkshops with an S, so plural, workshops.com. And like I mentioned, the curriculum, I have 2 editions. One is for agencies and one is for schools. And there's 20 lessons, and I mentioned earlier that they're well scripted and teaching tools and all that. But there's also a manual on how do you set up a group and how do you what makes a good sexuality educator. So there's also some semi-training in the beginning as well. So there's that. And then I think I mentioned earlier too, the 2 online courses There is one for parents on how to talk to your kids with developmental disabilities about sexuality, and then a staff training as well on how to talk one-on-one with people with developmental disabilities. So those are all on the website if people want to look into those as a resource. I also do in-service workshops too, and I travel to do those. So if anyone's interested in having some kind of staff training or anything, I'm available to do that. And then also on the website is we do a 3-day training for people who want to become sexuality educator trainers for their agency. So if someone's like, yes, I really want this topic to come to my agency, they could attend the training, and then they take back a curriculum and handouts and things for staff training and parent workshops. And so they can be that sort of the resource in their agency for this topic and help others get comfortable with it. So we've got one coming up in May in Hartford, Connecticut. So that's another resource. So just really like sort of how I started out is that people really do want to address this topic, but just need some support and some resources. And so that's a lot of my focus is supporting people and being able to tackle this topic.
Yeah, there is something comforting about the idea of, Katherine, could you come talk about sexuality for a bit?
Exactly. Right, exactly. But I do see it changing. I do see people saying, okay, I'll do it. But will you hold my hand a little bit? And really the cool thing, Rob, is I've done these trainings for a long time. And some of the work that I did in Maine, we would do these 3-day trainings, and then people would go back to their agency. And then we would get together every 6 months and just, I would come and, I'd be there to answer questions, or we'd have some content to talk about. And, after a while, I wasn't even teaching anymore. I was just kind of sitting there, filing my nails, right? Because everyone else was already doing the work and they were teaching each other. And they're like, oh, no, I use this exercise or activity. And I'm just sitting there and I'm like, this is exactly what I want, right? I don't want people to feel like they need me. Like they got this,
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So yeah, it is beautiful. It's a feel-good moment,
Well, Katherine, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Maybe you've done these before. I don't know how much people have done podcasting, probably radio interviews and everything before. This is not too dissimilar, I guess. Yeah,
no, it was really fun. And it's such a nice format and so laid back. So thank you.
I try. Well, Katherine, thanks so much. I appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Have a great day. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks again so much to Katherine McLaughlin for taking the time to talk to us about this very important topic. I know not all of our audience works with adults or adolescents with disabilities, but for those of you who do, please do take a look at Katherine's website, disabilityworkshops.com, for a sense of what her curriculum looks like. And we'll also post a couple of those links that Katherine mentioned in the interview. We hope you enjoyed our extra bonus episode. We veered from kind of our normal format for this one. We've done a few of these before, and any chance we get to talk about something a little more informal, then we love to do that, because there's so much information to be learned and not enough time. So any chance we get to talk to other individuals or to share that information with BCBAs, we are more than happy to do so. So please let us know if you liked this type of format. Let us know by emailing us at abainsidetrack@gmail.com, commenting on the Facebook page or website, or messaging us on Twitter. If you'd like to see more of these sort of short form interviews with other practitioners in the field of special education, because I personally love talking to other professionals. It's one of my favorite parts of doing this job. It's working with others and learning new things so that I can bring it back to the other individuals I work with, my clients, and then my coworkers. We'll be back to our regular format for our next episode, but until then, keep responding. Bye.